Good evening. Welcome to Live from Prairie Lights. I'm Lindsay Park. Tonight, we're very pleased to present poets Jessica Jacobs and Nickole Brown, who will read to us from their new books of poetry. First up, Jessica Jacobs will read from her debut collection, a biography and poems of Georgia O'Keeffe, Pelvis with Distance. Laura Lyle says, in her eloquent poems, Jessica Jacobs artfully intertwines her own voice with Georgia O'Keeffe's words in this poet's exploration of the painter's sensitivity, aesthetics, character, and courage. Christopher Merrill writes, and just as the artist distilled the essence of her subject matter, abstracting from flowers and bones, landscapes and clouds, a vivid story of her walk in the sun, so Jessica Jacobs discovers a vibrant music rooted in poetry. Jessica Jacobs' work has appeared in Beloit Poetry Journal, Cave Wall, Iron Horse, the Missouri Review, Poet Lore, and Rattle, among other journals and anthologies. She holds a BA from Smith College and an MFA from Purdue University. She has been Editor-in-Chief of Sycamore Review, and she is currently a 2014-15 visiting assistant professor of English at Hendrix College and faculty of the Sewanee Young Writers Conference. In spring 2016, she will be the Hendrix Murphy Writer-in-Residence at Hendrix College. She lives in Little Rock, Arkansas with her wife, the poet Nickole Brown. Please welcome Jessica Jacobs.
Thank you. Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks so much to Craig and Brenda for inviting us here. We really appreciate it, and to all of you for coming out. Okay, so whoa, very loud. So I'm writing about the artist Georgia O'Keeffe, who in 1908 moved to New York to study art. And at that time, the idea of finding your voice was not a part of art. She was classically trained, which basically meant copying the old masters, dead white men primarily, until their voice became her voice. But at the same time, in Europe, you have artists like Picasso, Rodin, Duchamp, who are starting to challenge the boundaries of what art can be. But the only place they were shown was this tiny gallery across town called 291, which was owned by this famous photographer, Alfred Stieglitz. And all of the poems about O'Keeffe are written in her voice. Alfred Stieglitz at 291, first encounter. When that boy demanded I muse for him, learn the 1,000 ways in an unmoving hour to itch, I sat, the painted, not the painter, until other students intervened, invited us out to troop through the snow, pure only in its falling. We tracked the slurried grit 5 flights up to that anonymous box of a room. That's okay. To that anonymous box of a room, with drawings by Rodin skewered to its walls. Sketched with his eyes closed, they all said, same way Stieglitz must have hung them. But then, a negative dripping from his fingertips, there he was. A summer thunderstorm in that bricked-in brownstone. At their questions, the weather vane of his body began to swivel. No, these are not a joke. Yes, they are art. Even his mustache, that white whisk broom, bristled. Twice my age and a bird's nest of hair and a squash blossom nose, fight broken, crooked from the side. And yet my chest clenching as it had those days' storm clouds proud across the prairies. By morning, a far darkness just perceptible. By noon, a towering freighter, cargoed with magnetic north. He too demanded my attention. So even though at this time she was 21 and he was 45 and married and had a daughter, there was a connection between them. It was immediate, and it started out very formally, and she moved to Texas soon after she was in New York to teach, and they started corresponding. But very quickly, their letters got a lot more personal, much more heated. She would tell him things, and remember this is, 1915, that were really illicit. That she would go wandering in the desert and paint nude studies of herself. And he would write and tell her how he would go swimming in upstate New York and scandalize the neighbors by swimming naked. So, Nude Series 8. Naked swimmer, I am your blue lake, a hot moon lifting from my throat. Tonight, I am full of wheels and empty canyons, desert so open we walk without roads. I throw bottles at the maid to order stars for my sister's rifle to spark, break, burst glass to belated sunset. The sheet on my bed is a great twist. It is strange to write you just because I want to, but I hate to be undone by a little thing like distance. So they continue to write, and Stieglitz asking her what she would want more than anything else. She says that she would like to come to New York and paint. So he reaches out to all of his patrons and friends and gathers together enough money that she can quit her job and move to New York. Very quickly, he leaves his family, moves in with her, and eventually they move to the very famous Shelton Hotel. And even though at this time he had been going through a fallow period with his photography, immediately he begins photographing her. The Shelton with sunspots. You with your camera are a boy with a ball jar, out trapping fireflies. My secret, though, is there is no corner I cannot paint my way out of. You want me as pupil? Fine. I'm all aperture, all film stock, silver salted and emulsified. But I won't stop with just you. I take it all in. Morning, with its halved-appled light, exposes in me invisible images. Gray web of water towers, wind-riffled river, painting calls them out. Shows how even by day, this is a lunar city, an island of indirect illumination. I stand to the east and fit my eye to the grid, New York, the country's kaleidoscope. Lit, unlit windows, lumen-tiled towers. Here is where we live. This gun barrel, this crested butte, this jack in its pulpit of smog-hooded sky. And there, in that glare, our window. So, as you might imagine, Stieglitz, being very famous, very well known as a photographer and a gallery owner, had a huge personality, and he surrounded himself by other artists, primarily men, very big personalities, and eventually O'Keeffe started to feel really hemmed in. They would tell her what she could and couldn't paint. They told her she couldn't paint buildings, so that's what she did for the next 2 years to prove them wrong. But eventually it became too much, and she started to travel west. And she had fallen in love with the desert landscape when she'd been in Texas. And one time on a trip to Colorado, she had seen New Mexico, and it just kind of kept coming back to her. So she would go there and eventually bought a Model A Ford to make it easier for her to take that trip. And this is a poem in 2 parts. Black Abstraction. 1. Days my window-propped elbow turns shades darker than the rest of me. I would crush every passing thing. Rust-red silos, scrub oaks hard scrabble green, the mountains blue with distance. Grind it to powder I could cut with this sky's titanium white and paint it all whole again. I've never known you to make a trip to photograph. While you men speak of America, yet never travel west of the Hudson, I want to take the country in and make it me. Far from New York, which is brighter by night, I cross into Texas, where dusk ignites marigold and smolders fast to bone black. A hard right brings me to desert. I stop. The air is cold, but the car's bonnet is warm beneath my shoulders. So dark, there is no horizon. All feels like sky. In such nowhere, my eyes can hear the ticking engine, lowing cattle, loud light of the stars. 2. The next afternoon, New Mexico. Trees stoop, the earth reddens, houses hug the ground, all of it making the sky ache with blue. In any view, it is the focal point, not trees with sky, but sky with everything. So about the time I began writing the poems about O'Keeffe in New Mexico, I started to ask myself why this person mattered so much to me. I had read thousands of pages of her letters. I had traveled all over to go to archives and see her paintings, and I couldn't figure it out. And I felt like the best way to do that would be to go and spend time in New Mexico. I knew I was drawn to her, her independence, her confidence, but I really wanted to understand who she was and how she lived as she did. So I found this tiny, primitive cabin way out in the desert in New Mexico. It was about 35 miles by car from the next closest town, 5 miles by foot from the next closest neighbor, so way, way out. No electricity, no cell phone, no internet, no running water. And I was there for a month, which was absolutely incredible and totally terrifying. So, okay. In the Canyon 2, Fear. Sun lavas over the cliff lip into my first full canyon day, while I watch from the marsh of residual night. When put in touch with the priest who'd lived here for each of the last 3 Octobers, I'd written to ask how much food to bring, what other supplies. She replied with 2 questions. What is your experience with solitude? How are you girding yourself for this time? At a sound like a Cessna, I turned to see only a hummingbird. Pressure builds in my chest. I've felt this before, but only when confined in a cave's crawl length in a crowded tent. But here, nothing but space, but air, for me, for a month, alone. Knowing the root of anxiety is anxere, to be without breath, I inhale, I try, but breath is a strangler fig, a rib cage tourniquet. My hands and feet grow honeycombed, carbonated. The dog barks at something only he can see. I ache for a return to bed, for the child's comforts of sheets overhead. If I can't see this day, it can't see me. Rifling books at random, I find God at creation poured light into vessels. Unable to contain it, they shattered and fell. Tikkun olam, Jews gathered these shards to repair the world. But there was a second shattering, a second type of repair, tikkun hanafesh, repair of the soul. Inherent in brokenness is breaking open, the ability to hold more than when whole. How much will I hold when this is over? And as you can imagine, when you have a month entirely by yourself and there's no Netflix or Pandora or anything like that, I had a lot of time to think about things, not always things I wanted to think about necessarily. And there was this woman from my past who just kept coming up again and again. In the Canyon 5, memory. The music station in my mind has finally quit. In the silence, memory surface. All the standard set pieces. Awkward breakups, shameful gaffes, after-the-fact eloquence for occasions long past. And through it all, the poet from Kentucky met in the doldrums of a New York winter. 5 years ago now, 6? How the southern accent she'd unlearned as a kid rose to ghost her syllables when she read her poems aloud. How her hair, sun-streaked, was curled as the churning waves of a walled-out day on the Pacific. Her endless gray scarf unwinding and unwinding as I tried to find my way to her throat. The unperfumed warmth in the cleft beneath her ear. The weight of her breasts in my palms as she straddled my hips. How I ran after her, out into the street, but she'd already left. Memory as film reel. Each image lost to the next, so swiftly my eyes lie to conjure broken moments whole. Flash them past fast enough, and there she is again in my arms. So while in the desert, Stieglitz never came to visit O'Keeffe. She went out there on her own, and she developed her own obsessions. And one of them was this flat-top mountain called Pedernal that she could see out her window. And sometimes it would be the subject of a painting, sometimes it would show up in the background, but it was like she was haunted by it in some way. And she even said that God told her if she painted it often enough, he would give it to her. I think she was joking. I don't really know. Road to Pedernal. And I apologize for my Spanish pronunciation, but there you go. In Taos Plaza, vendors ask, "Quiere probar?" Not to taste, but to test, so I often say yes. Insubstantial as that spun sugar, the view can be compressed easy as a hand fan, folded leaf to leaf. This red dirt road, washed pink by spring, doesn't just go toward the mountain, but to it, muscling up like a great tongue. Pedernal, in turn, shadows out to test me. On days when it is flint, I am the steel it sparks against. On others, when I want to rub my face to it as the deer do my fence posts, when I grow languid and light turns into a splendid, soft metal, it is the touchstone that assays me. I paint it again and again, claiming and claimed by it. By night, another transformation. I seem to become a woman again and wish to be near you. The other thing O'Keeffe began to paint in New Mexico were the bones that she would find in the desert, completely stripped and bleached by the sun. This is the title poem, Pelvis with Distance. Bone grows from desert in distance. Bone grows girdling sky, grows vast and trunkless, sockets stocked with light. Pelvis is loop, is meant for looking through. Pelvis, that hollow and arch. Distance basined by bone, ambit of absence. I am, you are, always looking through the other. I have just two more poems. In 1946, Stieglitz died and O'Keeffe moved permanently to New Mexico. And even though she didn't speak of him often, didn't really write about him a lot, it was very clear that when she did, she missed him desperately. She called him her catalyst, her clarifier, and I imagined that she had written to him for so many years, even once he had died, she wouldn't be able to break that habit. So this is a poem, or a letter, that would be written in 1949, the year she moved to New Mexico. A blackbird with snow-covered red hills. After years shared at a distance, I am already accustomed to an empty bed. I summon the dogs from the morning melt, their garland of red prints mudding the floors. Walls breathe back the stove's heat. As long as I am here, you can still be in New York, grousing about your bowels and feet. I pull on overshoes, walk, sketch, you lunch with old friends at the gallery. I make dinner, read, wear your sweater to bed, the blue one, fall asleep writing to you in my head of that day, the next. Knees tucked so tight to my chest, I hold my own soul's cannonball through the night. And you are there, taking sun on the dock, sputtering as my lake splash startles you awake. Love, come join me in this water. And so after reading all of these letters back and forth, I realized that it wasn't just O'Keeffe I was interested in, it was her relationship to Stieglitz, and understanding how it was that these two very stubborn, very intelligent, talented people could live together, could form this life together, and remain independent. So I tried to start writing my own letters to that poet that I mentioned, and some of the false starts are in here, but this is the final letter I ended up with. In the Canyon 11, to the poet. This cabin, I've learned, was conceived as a line camp, a way station for cowboys pushing cattle up or down the western mesa. Construction began late summer. A group of men hired in town to build it. Mexican field hands and one lone gringo, barely in his 20s, working his way west, seeking something the college he dropped out of hadn't given him. So he worked this land for a season, clearing roads, stretching miles of barbed wire around posts he'd hewn and planted, helping build this place. And all the while falling for the ranch owner overseeing him, a woman whose home had earthen floors that required daily watering, who had no electricity but a grand piano. By the time they put on the roof, it was winter. As the crew fitted tarps atop the rafters, piled on insulating dirt, and covered it with tin, she sat on the cold ground cooking rice for the men, warmed by the fact she'd fallen right back for this boy 18 years younger than her youngest son, this good man who stood on the roof, throwing down kisses to her in the snow. After they married, their first Christmas was spent in this cabin. The silver bulbs they hung from the juniper off the porch still sway and shine as I write this, 20 years on. From a branch there, a goldfinch bobs and weaves, stitching a bright yellow seam through the blue. The sage silvers in the sun, and the wind hawks across the porch, hovering the rugs. Which is all to say I'm writing to you from a sacred space, from a monument to improbable love. I imagine you here with me, lying on the worn wood of this bench, the sharp cross-bedding of your shoulder blades, the twinned arroyos tracing your spine, the fine down on your lower back, sending up small flares into the afternoon light, my mouth on your sun-warmed skin. Which is to say, I am still in love with you. Terrifying as it is to offer this so nakedly, to risk the chance you find me lacking. After so many years without you, I'm far more frightened of a life in which I didn't have the courage to offer, the courage to ask. You are the only home I've ever known. Thank you.
Thank you, Jessica Jacobs. Next up, Nickole Brown will read from her new book of poetry, Fanny Says. Rebecca Gale Howell says, in Fanny Says, Nickole Brown distills the whole of America into one woman. Body, loving, racist, battered, healed, and gorgeous with determination. Our country has no history that does not touch the South. Our divisions are our unions. Here, Brown unleashes a voice returned to teach us a lesson. Reader, fair warning, you can't hide from Fanny. You will be changed by this book. Nickole Brown is the author of Sister, a novel and poems published by Hen Press, and an anthology, Airfare, that she co-edited with Judith Taylor. She graduated from the Vermont College of Fine Arts and studied literature at Oxford University as an English-speaking Union Scholar. She has received grants from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Kentucky Foundation for Women, and the Kentucky Arts Council. She worked for Saraband Books for 10 years, and she was the national publicity consultant for Arctoy Books and the Palm Beach Poetry Festival. She has taught creative writing at the University of Louisville, Bellarmine University. Currently, she is the editor for the Marie Alexander series in prose poetry at White Pine Press and is on faculty every summer at the Sewanee Young Writers Conference and at the Low Residency MFA program in creative writing at Missouri State. She is an assistant professor at University of Arkansas at Little Rock, where she lives with her wife poet Jessica Jacobs, as earlier noted. Please welcome Nickole Brown.
I'm awfully short, so I have to be careful with these microphone things. Before I begin, I just want to thank Jan for having me. I have been in love with this bookstore for years. If you guys aren't here on a weekly basis, supporting this store, showing up, buying coffee, buying books, you absolutely need to. This is one of the best independents in the country. So thank you so much for all of your work. Seriously. I'll be reading from Fanny Says. It's my second collection, and it's a biography of my grandmother. Her name was Frances Lee Cox. She was from Bowling Green, Kentucky, which is western Kentucky. And if you think your grandmother was like my grandmother, you might be wrong. But who knows? We could be related. So just let me know. To begin, I'd like to give you a sense of her voice. So the book is a hybrid book. You have some lineated verse that's more in my voice, and then you have prose sections that I didn't necessarily write. It's just things that I wrote down that Fanny said. I used to love just to sit next to her, particularly when at the end of her life when she wasn't feeling well. I would just keep my notebook with me and just write down everything she said. So this is a list. It's in 10 parts, but I'll probably only read 5 or 6. And it is advice that she gave to me and advice that I heard again and again as I'm growing up. So all of you ladies in the audience, pay attention, because this is Fanny Says How to Be a Lady. Number 1, never tell your age. If under cardiac arrest and the ambulance comes, the paramedic will ask lots of questions. The city you live in, the president, your last name. Answer him best you can, but if he asks the year you were born, say, "You're the doctor here. If you're so fucking smart, why don't you tell me how old I am?" True story. 2, watch your reputation close. Remember, if you lie down with dogs, you'll come up with fleas, and no man will buy a cow if he gets the milk for free. Now, if you need a husband, put on a pair of pants, tight now so it shows your rump, and get a little chain to walk that dog. Go on to that fire station and walk past. Now, those firemen are going to notice you and whoop and holler, but don't you pay them no mind. You just keep walking with your head held high. By the 4th or 5th time you walk past, one of them's going to say, "Well, I'm going outside to talk to that hoe." And that's just what he'll say, but I'm sure he'll learn right different soon enough. And then it'll be all she wrote. How do you think I got Jessica? Just walking back and forth. I do have a cute picture of you in a fireman's outfit. 3, take it easy. Keep your feet up. And don't carry nothing heavy unless you want your uterus to fall out on the hot sidewalk. And if you lift weights, you'll lose your perky breasts. You won't be left with a titty one. Trust your grandmama. Stay away from the gym, 'cause like I say, I don't believe in exercise. No, not one bit. 4. This is an important one too, right here. Don't fool with the boy with no home training. If he pulls in front of the house and lays on the horn, don't you answer. You ain't no whore. He needs to come to the front door proper and knock. And when you get to his car, Grandma will be watching to see if he opens the passenger side. If not, you stand still. Let him jump in alone. Soon enough, he'll notice you're not in the car and come around to open your door. I mean it. I'll be watching, and if you so much as touch that handle, I'm coming out to whoop your ass. A man will respect you once you've earned it. Start a puppy early and he won't pull the leash. 5. People mostly see what you say. Now, if you got a crooked nose, let them know, and that will be all they notice. And your feet, I know they're flat and turned in, big enough to row a canoe, but tell people and they'll think you're afflicted. Look in the mirror, girl. You're as pretty as you let yourself be. You're just fine. 6. Be mean and fight for it. That's the only way it will ever come to you. Remember what Grandma tells you. People will take only what you let them. And you hold that head back and walk straight. You understand? Be mean. Fight for it. Hold the head back. Walk straight. You remember what I tell you. You'll remember, won't you? So I'd like to read this poem for Brenda. I think the only thing you need to know is that this poem, I'm reading it to give you maybe a sense of where Fanny came from. We're talking about Western Kentucky during the Great Depression. And the first date that she had with my grandfather, the man she was married to her whole life, was to go see Snow White. This is called Your Monthly. Your monthly is what her mama called it. But what I want is a word for the year she bled freely. A wad of old wash rags, each end pinned to a belt around her waist. A word for 12 happy deaths, each unfertilized cell that washed out, saying, "Not yet, Fanny. You still just a child yourself," because this world knows a girl of 14's too old to be playing cowboys and Indians, but also knows how young she was when, stiff red feather in her hair, she scrambled inside, hollering, "Mama, come quick, I'm 'bout to bleed to death." A word for the year she learned to walk in red shoes pulled from some rich lady's trash. The sound of those heels down the hall, 2 guns cocking with quick clicks. A sound to hide from her daddy in the morning, eating his breakfast of milk and corn pone with a spoon. A word for the time before a man swaggered in, bought her a dime store Coke, bought her her very first bra, then took her to the picture show to see a cartoon with dwarves impossibly happy to be working the mines. A year later, she was expecting. Though what exactly I was expecting, she told me, I couldn't have said. A word, please, somebody, give me. For that season with her uterus small and tight as an inedible green pear, her body keen and cramped in its stall. a word for all things not yet stretched to bits, a word for all things not yet broken, a word for all things left unbroken, a word for breakable yet unbroken things, a word for unbroken expectant things. Tell me, what is that word? The title of this poem is Fuck. Fuck is what she said, but what mattered was the tone. Not a drive-by spondy, and never the fricative connotation as verb, but from her mouth voweled, often preceded by well, with the U low as if dipping up homemade ice cream, waiting to be served last so she'd scoop the fruit from the bottom where all the good stuff had settled down. Imagine, not a word cold-cocked or screwed to the wall, but something almost resigned, a sigh, an oh well. The F word made so fat and slow it was basset hound, chunky with an extra syllable, just enough weight to make a jab to the ribs, more of a shoulder shrug. Think of what's done to shit in the South. This is she-et, but flipped with a whip, made a little more tart. Well, fuck, Betty Sue, I never did see that coming. Can you believe? Or my favorite, not as explicative, but noun. Fucker, she said. But what she meant was darlin', sugar pie, sweet beets, a curse word made into a term of endearment, as in, come here, you little fucker, and give your grandma a kiss. If the child was young enough for diapers, he'd still be a shit ass, but big enough to lift his arms and touch his hands together over his toddling toe head, he was so big, all grown, a cute little fucker. Watch him go. Fuck is what she said, but what she needed was a drum, a percussion to beat story into song, a chisel to tap honey from the meanest rock. Not just fuck if I know, or fuck me running, or fuck me sideways, or beats the fuck out of me, but said tender, knowing there was only one thing in this whole world you needed to hear most. You fucker, you, don't you know there wasn't a day when you weren't loved? If you still don't understand, try this. A woman up from poor soil, bad dirt, pure clay. A woman as succulent, something used to precious little water, hard sun. Rock crop, maybe, threading roots to suck nutrients from the nothing of gravel, the nothing of stone, a thriving thing, sturdy, thorned, green out of mere spite. And because you least expect it, laughing, cussing up a storm. My grandmother who didn't ask for power but took it in bright, full, fuck it all bloom. Y'all are so quiet. so quiet. So my grandfather was a very difficult man. And when I was 16, I took her downtown to file an EPO, which is essentially an emergency protective order. And this is an epistolary poem. This is a letter addressed to my grandmother. And it's called EPO. Forgive me. I was 16, hard-headed, big-haired, ready to fight. I was newfangled, a know-it-all, a meddler with an overstuffed carpet bag. Forgive me. I talked you into it. I took you downtown. for saying you were silly to be afraid of traffic and parallel parking of meters and paperwork and the family court judge. Fanny, we can do this, I said, like some kind of cheerleader dumbstruck with virtue, ready to change the world. Let me do this, I said. School was out, I had my own car, and it was easy enough to call the pizza joint and tell a version of the truth. I can't come into work. I feel kinda sick. The word dislocated hung on my tongue, your cabinet from its hinge, your shoulder from your arm, for the word grandfather curdled in my mouth, and I thought we could spit it out. Forgive me for the obscenity of your size 5 house slippers up the courthouse stairs, for the security guard eyeing through the x-ray machine, suspicious of all your little disco cases, one for lipstick and another for your lighter, even your cigarette holder, a gold box threatening his big man screen. Forgive me for the conveyor belt. It smudged your white pocketbook, and for the life of me, we never could get it clean. Because even then, I knew what I'd done. Oh, Fanny, I didn't realize this place would be so dirty. Who in God's name pissed right on the wall? I wish somebody would talk to us. I wish somebody would take a rag to that nasty plexiglass and sit here on my coat. I know those hard plastic chairs are killing your knees. Forgive me for the hours we waited in the ash and gum and grease, the angry men pacing angry, the women on their knees changing diapers, babies flat back on the cold tile floor. Forgive me, for while we waited, I fooled with the official initials. Elephants pick olives. Elves pursue orchids. Egypt ponders Ontario. Eggs produce odor. Again, I'm so sorry. Evelyn punched out. Eve pinched ochre. Edith's pussy opened. Enough. Please. Ouch. Everyone pummeled over. Each pushed out. Forgive me. I thought I could stomach what happened to things jerked from their homes. Jellyfish puddled to wet tissue on the shore, the same as a yellow iris cut and brought inside. How quickly the bloom makes a Kleenex of her beautiful face. You wore your hair in rollers under a scarf wrapped so tight. It looked like you were an immigrant to your own country. A lady prepared for snow in spring. And your signature at the bottom of the form was old-fashioned, practiced, perfectly slanted. And I mused, even if she never really learned to write, she sure made certain her signature looked good. When the caseworker called your married name, he insisted he talk to you alone. Forgive me. I let him do that. I let him, and you swallowed and sweetly said, "All righty then, here goes." So one of my favorite books in the world is a book by Dorothy Allison called 2 or 3 Things I Know for Sure. And it was a book that really gave me permission to think about my family, my family's history, and their stories, and to start to really write them down. And one of the things that Dorothy Allison talks about in her book is that there were all of these people who had died, and their stories were completely forgotten. And I think this happens a lot if you come from a big family. So I pulled a quote here. It's by Dorothy, of course. It says, "It was the ones no one remembered who pulled at me." And this poem is called "The Dead." So tell me, who remembers Topa, her daddy, his face marked with smallpox, or his two sisters, one that died one day, the other in the next. Who remembers quarantine houses marked with a red card, the brain fevers and blood fluxes, or the uncle who found a rafter in the tobacco barn for his neck? And wasn't there a second cousin who phoned his brother before making a confetti of his own brains? Or that other young uncle, a good-looking son of a bitch, who, face down in the river, took mud into his handsome lungs? Or the babies, Jesus, always the babies, drowned in wash tubs or bit by brown recluse? Or Claire, a girl born 4 months early, small enough to crib in a shoebox, who thrived, but her brother, full term, healthy as a horse, who was sleeping sound on his second day when he just died? And who remembers Yael but me, that girl with a name so pretty I could taste the syllables, Yael, and called her again and again? She was only 7, her blood a sandstorm of cells at war with itself. Or my soft-spoken cousin, that kid surfer who thought he could crush time-release painkillers with his teeth and live. Does anybody remember how impossible death seemed in Florida? How like a sun-scorched fern his hands curled, 2 black fiddleheads, the foam at his mouth when all his chicken shit friends left him for dead. On the way to the funeral, Fanny got after us for wearing black. All you young girls always wearing dark, 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 she said. You need to put on a bright and pretty color, something that don't make you look so depressed all the fucking time. We laughed, reminded her where we were going, but who can say her fussin' was a joke? Her amnesia seemed fender-struck, a switch flipped off inside a woman who couldn't take no more. Later that day, we walked to church under mangroves swarmed with a bright green fluster of wild parakeets. I can't say I remember much more than my aunt, how she looked up into the trees, said, "Oh, little birds, don't you know?" And the birds, briskly chittering back, answered her, "No." So I just have 2 more poems. So this is another vocabulary word for you. The word is flitter. And if any of you, if your family uses the word flitter in the same way that my family does, you have to tell me. I am looking for my lineage here. So, flitter. Flitter is what she said, but what she meant had nothing to do with the lighting from one bloom to the next by a monarch or an equally colorful diva at the bar. What she meant was your privates, your girly parts, something you better soap up daily and watch like a spectacled hawk. It was code, really, a kid-friendly word like every Christ-fearing family has, something to sidestep the gynecological genitals in its speculum-chilled vagina, something that wasn't her sex, a word that said Colette, both verb and noun exhaling the same thin, gentlewoman cigar. Hers was a word rated PG, something that wasn't once an innocent kitty in boots that now swung practically buck naked from a pole. And never do you hear a flitter in any bass-thumping, salt and pepper my mango vajayjay songs. No, flitter is lyrical but awkward. Despite its featherweight meaning, it never does fly. To me, flitter sounds heavy, ironic, with the phonic aptitude of a frying pan, a word a little too natural, perhaps, in need of a shave. What kept it alive was that F sound, slightly transgressive, ready to leap off the four-letter cliff, but more so it echoed with fat and flat, two qualities of a flitter Fanny found. A baby girl, for example, was always born with a fat flitter, and that's exactly what she would be called. And then there was fat as a flitter, applying to cute, chunky things like chipmunk cheeks and toddler's wrists and puppy dogs. Then, of course, there was flat, a more mature version of the same. And if you did enough crunches, yes, your belly would be flat as a flitter. The similes can go on as carbonated beverages can go flat as a flitter, as your hair on a humid day, and if you drive west, all that land, you got it, flitter flat. My favorite times with the word were the last days we had her, when she needed oxygen and ice chips and kept death backed into a corner by calling me a flitterhead. I swore I didn't have her remote, and she didn't believe me till she found it under the covers between her legs. She changed the channel, said, "Okay, flitterhead, I'm sorry, right there was the clicker right under my flitter. Who would have thought?" And when it was time to change her, to wipe off the blackest stool with a warm cloth, she kept me from deep sorrow by saying, "Make sure to hit my bald flitter now. Nobody tells you every hair falls out down there as you age. And hit it with a dose of powder, Coley. Grandma's gotta stay fresh." I clinged to her as I would a baby, turning her best I could from side to side. And later, when I tired, I called in the nurse to help me hold her so I could change the sheets. The nurse was from an island not far from Florida, but far enough that when our work was done, she stopped me, asked, "I'm sorry, your grandmother, I can't understand her. Can you tell me what language she speaks?" That was when I knew. I wasn't losing my grandmother, no. I was losing my home, the one place I could understand the world through a mother tongue only she could sing. It's a dangerous microphone now. Does anybody know what Nickole perfume smells like? Oh, maybe no remembrance. All right, it's all gone now. It's not even for sale anymore. For my grandmother's perfume, Nickole. Because your generation didn't wear perfume, but chose a scent, a signature. Every day you spritzed a powerhouse floral with top notes of lavender and mandarin. A loud smell, 1 part Doris Day, that girl next door who used Technicolor to find a way to laugh about husbands screwing their secretaries over lunch. The rest, all Faye Dunaway, all high drama extensions of nails and lashes, your hair a breezy fall of bangs, a stiletto entrance that knew to walk sideways, hip first. Now watch a real lady descend the stairs. Launched in 1968, Nickole was the 1950s tingling with the beginning of disco. Nickole was a housewife tired of gospel, mopping her house to Stevie Wonder instead. You wore so much of it, tiny pockets of your ghost lingered hours after you were gone. And last month, I stalked a woman wearing your scent through the grocery so long I abandoned my cart and went home. Fanny, tell me? How can manufactured particles carry you through the air? I always express what I see, but it was no photo that stopped and queased me to my knees. After all these years, you were an invisible trace, and in front of a tower of soup cans, I was a simple animal craving the deep memory worn by a stranger, oblivious of me. If I had courage, the kind of fool I'd like to be, I would have pressed my face to her small shoulder, and with the sheer work of 2 pink lungs, I would have breathed enough to conjure you back to me.